Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
What is Skinwalker Ranch? What is a skinwalker? Do UFOs and bizarre creatures really come out of holes in the air there?
Hello, and welcome to the 957th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WOON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live, and on YouTube and via TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and those shape-shifting questions came from my co-host, partner in Paranormal Adventures, and dad, Paul.
James Keenan is a prolific novelist, researcher, and boots-on-the-ground investigator, and you probably have seen him on the first season of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch on the History Channel. James worked in law enforcement and private investigations for over 20 years, and he has appeared on numerous television and radio shows and at conferences. His subjects include the paranormal, lost history, giants, and UFOs. Most recently, he has focused much of his time and energy on the unexplained events occurring in and around Skinwalker Ranch in northeastern Utah.
So, James Keenan, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Hi, Paul. Hi, Ben. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, well, it's great to have you with us. And I guess we'll just hop right into it because we like to get into the nitty-gritty of things very quickly. So, what is Skinwalker Ranch, and how did you become involved with it?
Yes, so Skinwalker Ranch is one of those paranormal hotspots. Ton of high strangeness going on. History going back at least for 70, 80 years. Obviously, it's a lot longer than that. And you have all types of paranormal activity, including UFOs, UAPs, dogmen, skinwalkers. You have the high strangeness in the fact that there's this transient energy, both magnetic and electromagnetic, that is constantly moving around the property, which is approximately 512 acres. Remember, too, that the paranormal doesn't stick to boundaries that humans have made, so it's actually all throughout the Uinta Basin, which is in northeastern Utah, where Skinwalker Ranch is located. And I got involved. My background from an educational standpoint is in anthropology and archaeology. I have my degrees in interdisciplinary studies from the University of California at Santa Barbara. And my main focus, especially during my excavations, was in Mesoamerica areas, specifically the Yucatan Peninsula and the island of Cozumel, which is on the northeast point of Mexico. And my focus in on the Maya culture and the Toltec and the Mexica led me to move farther north into the United States, because I noticed that there was a lot of similarities, not just with the language of the Nahuatl language, but culturally a lot of what was being written down or kept in artifacts and petroglyphs, pictographs, or other type of script was very similar. And eventually I made my way up to northeastern Utah, because there are two groups of these desert archaic people. We don't really know who they were, at least who they originated as, and we just have them named by the cultural sites that we found artifacts. One is the Fremont, the other is Barrier Canyon style. There's also San Juan River, which would probably be a third, where they have these truly unique and bizarre petroglyphs and pictographs in regards to the anthropomorphic and zoomorphic figures and the geometric figures that are within them. A lot of it doesn't make sense. They're very strange looking, and normal, common daily routines and daily life that other locations around the world collect, like maize, corn, musical play, animals, is missing. 95% of this rock art is it's truly unique, almost bizarre. And as I was collecting all these data points and logging them in between the similarities between Mesoamerican culture and this desert Southwest, I started seeing some very unique designs and interesting things going on that really that seemed to focus in that past in regards to the high strangeness that I also delve into, research-wise and investigate at a different level, and a lot of people will consider that paranormal. And I knew a little about Skinwalker Ranch. I had no clue where it was. I didn't know that it was 19 miles away from where I was doing my research. And somehow I ended up coming in contact with somebody from the Ute tribe. The Ute is the reservation that's currently there. They were not the Native Americans in that area that people think that this phenomenon is connected to. It's actually the Shoshone and the Timpanogos and the Paiute. The Ute were late to that area. But they told me, hey, Skinwalker Ranch is down here, and you're talking about these unique-looking creatures and things that are occurring in the petroglyphs. Well, it's still occurring. And so I ended up, making contact with those that currently work at the ranch. And this was before the show. And our research, when we put our research together, a lot of it was a crossover between this ancient archaic past and what's happening now. So it almost pushes the history of the land and the high strangeness that's occurring back thousands of years, if not all the way past the last ice age, and the connectivity between the gods of Mesoamerica, which I believe were living deities, especially from Teotihuacan, Tenochtitlan, Cihuacan, mainly giants or people of large stature. There was this huge connection, and there continues to be, and that's what my focus is on, not just the research, where I'm traveling down to Mexico City. I just got back from there, plan a trip to Madrid, Spain, to go to the Museo de Americas, but there's this between everything that's occurred, and it's ongoing, and that's where that's where it's at. That's how I got focused in on the ranch.
Okay, and so obviously, Ben, did you want to say?
Yes, two things. Number one, James, is your camera still active? If so,
it is, yes.
Oh, okay. For whatever reason, maybe it's just a poor connection. We don't have the camera on our end.
Well, not critical.
It's not critical. It's just a production note. So this is really interesting stuff, and also I didn't expect it to go in this direction. I'm very happy that you took it in this direction, because I myself am very fascinated by the idea of giants, especially in cultures. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept, you might be, of a universal history. It's this idea that throughout all cultures there's a similar narrative in all sort of creation stories, all sort of mythology, theology, that there's always these archetypes that are just constant throughout cultures, and one of them is giants. And my sort of interest in this sort of leads to, what is the connection of this history, I guess you could say this continuing narrative of these ancient cultures, and how Skinwalker Ranch is sort of the embodiment of this continuation?
Yeah, so what you're talking about is cultural diffusionism. 99.9% of the anthropologists and archaeologists will tell you that's BS, that there's no way that back in the day these cultures and civilizations around the world were connected, and that's just bogus. It was totally connected. Many of them were seafaring. Like you said, the deities are very similar, if not identical. What we have going on throughout the world, you have this constant talk of the last world and then entering into this world, which is either the fourth or fifth world, depending on what Native American culture you're talking about, was destroyed by a great deluge. And as you go through the world, through different places, like I focus in a lot on the Upper United Kingdom, Scotland, Ireland, Mexico, the desert Southwest. Recently, and I do have plans on, going to what would have been ancient Armenia, because that's where I believe the origination point was for the giants and for other cultures, which was Mount Ararat. And people think, well, Armenia is this really tiny little spot, but no, heck no. In the past, it encompassed most of what we consider Turkey right now. So you have history starting from Armenia, where these two giants fought one another, and the benevolent won and became a living deity to the ancient Armenians. And what people don't realize is that ancient Sumerians actually created cuneiform text writing to trade with the ancient Armenians, because they were that important.
And I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. And what happens now is you have a group of probably one of the last of the giants to survive, excuse me, which is known as the Site Ka. The Paiute considered them the red-headed cannibal giants. And guess where they were focused on was in Nevada and Utah. And you have a lot of the petroglyphs showing these anthropomorphic figures that have been carved into the rock art that's well over 7 feet tall. A specific example is McConkey Ranch, which is also known as Dry Fork Canyon petroglyphs, where you have this carving into the rock art well over 7 feet tall, and it has 6 digits on each of its hands and these massive feet. It's surrounded by other large anthropomorphic figures of large stature. They look to be headhunters. They've taken trophy heads. And you see this focus that the Native Americans were attempting to, I don't know if it was for protection, to let people know when they're entering the area to watch out for these beings, or if it was to pass this history on to future generations. But it encompasses everywhere where Skinwalker Ranch is. And the petroglyphs also have what look to be what many would consider or say a portal or a gateway to elsewhere or interdimensional. I call it an electron diffusion region because I believe it's a magnetic anomaly coming in contact with an electromagnetic anomaly.
You're kind of fading out there, James.
Oh, can you hear me?
I mean, I can hear you, but if you could speak up a little bit.
Sure. So you have these electron diffusion regions, which are magnetic anomalies coming into contact with electromagnetic anomalies and creating what people consider portals. And this looks to be captured in that rock art, which is all around Skinwalker Ranch. Skinwalker Ranch itself has a very interesting petroglyph that's never spoken about, which is identical to the Freemason square and compass with the circle within the circle at the bottom. But I truly believe that it may be a little older and may have been put there by the Mexicans or the Spaniards based on mining that occurred in the mesa. And it could be that the Freemasons that were there, they were the 9th Black Infantry in the cavalry that were at Fort Duchesne. 96% of them were Freemasons, which not many people know. No. So they could have also been focused in on the mesa and what's inside of that. And I think it was threefold that the Spaniards, the Mexicans, and the 9th Black Cavalry knew what was going on there in the past, what was being mined, and who was doing it, which I believe was a group of giants that the Navajo called the Starnake. So it's all intertwined.
Wow.
And it's interesting how it all leads this huge connection between the entire world right to that northeastern part of Utah.
So moving forward in history, we come to the 1990s, or correct me if I'm wrong, if it was before that, and Bigelow Laboratories, Robert Bigelow, how did he get interested in this Skinwalker Ranch, or the Sherman Ranch as it was called also, I guess, and how did modern Americans get into the research of this, and what prompted that? And what do you remember from that?
Yeah, so Robert Bigelow read a story in a small paper, I think it was the Deseret News, about this rancher and his family that had purchased the property in 93 or 94, and it was Terry Sherman and his family. And almost immediately they had this run-in with all this paranormal. They had cattle mutilations. They had this dire wolf that they shot, and it slightly affected it, but didn't kill it.
You're fading out again, unfortunately.
Can you hear me?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. So you had this strange creatures. They had UFOs, UAPs that the Sherman family was noticing. And it was truly bizarre. And it was written about in the Deseret News, and Robert Bigelow contacted Terry Sherman. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, NIDS was investigating, which is the National Institute for Discovery Sciences. And over the next couple of years, they had all this interesting high strangeness reported to them by Terry Sherman. Eventually, the Shermans left and sold the ranch to Robert Bigelow for $200,000. He took over, continued the investigation with NIDS. Everything that, 95% of what occurred has not been told to the public. Eventually, down the line, he dissolved NIDS and created BASS, which was the Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space System, or I can't remember the acronym completely at the time, but it was funded at one point by the OSAP program, which we've all heard, which is the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program, which involves this the tic-tac shaped craft that was out in the Pacific, and eventually led to the ATIP program. But not everybody recognizes that OSAP was created specifically for Skinwalker Ranch, and the BASS team only later went out further than the boundaries to collect UFO data. But a majority of that was just purchased and taken from MUFON. So a lot of what we are told, because very little is known about that, and I mean it's classified. It was government paid and funded, but we had 2 books come out written by Colm Kelleher and George Knapp. The last one was Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, which released a little bit of that prior classified information.
Yeah, I just reread it.
Right. So, yeah, and that was, Bob Bigelow's backstory into the ranch and how it became better known to the public.
Well, one of the, just from our point of view, we have our own vocabulary for these things. We call flap areas. All right, and obviously the Skinwalker Ranch seems to be the mother of all flap areas because there's been the funding and the personnel to research it properly. But it has struck us in we work generally on 6 flap areas concurrently, and in every single one we run into the military or something that looks like the military. And what you just described may indicate precisely why. Wouldn't we love to weaponize the paranormal or the quantum principles or whatever it is that are behind these high strangeness phenomena? And you just described in detail how that's being done at Skinwalker Ranch, and then it continues from there, as I understand it.
Yeah, it's now in different hands. There's a new individual that owns it. There's a different team investigating it.
Yeah.
The public has been given a fantastic opportunity to go along for the ride, I guess you could say, from the History Channel's television show.
Well, Ben's mom loves it, which I find rather disconcerting. He hasn't been too interested in this. This subject previously.
It's entertaining, to say the least.
I think it's very well done, frankly. But we have a couple of questions I think that would be appropriate to ask now. from Peter Shelley in Bogota, Colombia, one of our guest co-hosts from time to time. Ben, if you would.
Sure thing. Okie dokie. So Peter writes to us, can you explain the discovery you made regarding a NASA site 16 miles away from the ranch involving anomalous cavities under a huge cement square?
Boy, that's an hour talk show in and of itself.
25 minutes or 25 words or less.
Yeah.
Well, this is part one. We can always do more shows.
So as a matter of fact, on my YouTube channel, I just put up a couple weeks an entire presentation on that because it's just incredible. I almost feel like it was unfortunate that I fell down that rabbit hole. But there's a NASA site 16 miles east of the ranch that was a CIA NASA work site. It wasn't classified. I think that's bogus. I think part of it probably is. They used old USGS systems, they're stating seismometers that were underground, to track and see how sonic booms from our own top secret aircraft were being noticed, or if they were capable of not being seen, I guess, on what's occurring underground. And this was in the mid to late 1960s. The CIA and NASA took over the site and opened up their own project in the early 70s, but they used a lot of that old USGS data that came from the 1960s. And so the site's abandoned. Anybody can go out there. They just have to turn off on McCoy Flats before you get to Vernal. But so everybody talked about it. It was known somewhat. The locals knew about it, but nobody had ever really delved into it deeper and gone into what the USGS was doing out there. And lo and behold, I found several now not classified documents from USGS that they had this massive array underground, seismic array. One was a shallow array which encompassed 15.2 miles of the Uinta Basin. They were connected. It was drilled between 80 and 200 feet below ground. Then they had these deep vertical arrays that were drilled down to 9,000 feet. And they were supposedly testing for earthquakes, how explosions in the area were captured on data and PNS waves. And also, what the military jets were doing when they would create sonic booms. There were sister sites right outside of Flagstaff, Arizona, and the other one I think was outside of Edwards Air Force Base. And it's just interesting because you and I know that there's no way they would have spent this much money for what's in the documents. There had to be something else that they were monitoring underground in that area, because a lot of the PNS wave studies always seem to entail what ended in the Uinta Basin, even if it was coming, north or south, east or west from other countries. So it may have been that they were attempting to maybe spy on other nations through, I always call it ground traffic. What's occurring if they were detonating nuclear bombs in China or Russia, we would have been able to pick it up in the Uinta Basin. But, it's just interesting. So they put this array underground. A company called Geotech was a subcontractor. They were paid $250,000 to remove all of this material, which I took out 3D ground imaging and GPR and immediately found multiple sites that it was still underground. And I have the 3D imaging in the presentations. So that's bogus. It could have been somewhat removed, but not all of it. And you got to think, after 70 years, all that wiring is becoming exposed. All the collection technology that's underground is exposed. Is that energizing natural energy, or helping something increase the output of energy that's available under the basin? And is it creating or is it attracting this phenomena that we're seeing? And even crazier is they put in these 500,000 plus kilovolt power lines in the early 1980s, maybe around 83, 85. Guess where they go directly across this underground array? So do we have this tracking now and arcing and you know how natural energy encompasses around these power lines? Is it energizing through this wiring now with the southwest corner of the array only being about 1.8 miles away from the mesa above Skinwalker Ranch, and I think it's like 2.76 or 77 miles from the Skinwalker Ranch headquarters. So it's just interesting how you have all these moving parts to the phenomena that's occurring.
Now, it's interesting that you mentioned the high tension wires. I've found over the years that a good 80% of the major garden variety paranormal cases that I've investigated take place within 200 feet of high tension wires. And in the older days, the insulation was really not so great. When I was a reporter for a small daily, I actually stood under some high tension wires with a neon light bulb, and it lit up. So, I mean, there were all sorts of electrical connections here somewhere. Pardon the pun. Why don't we take our mid-show break? And you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM, 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. We'll be right back with Skinwalker Ranch and our great guest, James Keenan, so stick with us.
This is John Martin with an AARP Rhode Island update. In a thriving community, people of all ages and abilities have a variety of safe and accessible options for getting around. Walking, biking, pushing a stroller, or maneuvering a wheelchair, taking public transportation, or driving your own car. Planning, designing, and building roads that meet the needs of all users is essential to building a truly livable community. Complete Streets Design allows everyone to share the road and get their own safe piece of the street. Join AARP Rhode Island on Tuesday, August 9th at 10 a.m. for a free virtual forum featuring national and local experts showcasing the successful implementation of Complete Streets projects around the country and in Rhode Island and how communities benefit. Learn how cities and towns consider and incorporate these design principles and how you can get involved in your community. That's Tuesday, August 9th at 10 a.m. Register today. Join us. Register at aarp.org/RI events.
And welcome back to Behind the Paranormal on WOON Radio, AM and FM. And we have our great guest today, James Keenan, and we're talking about Skinwalker Ranch. Now, James, before we get into Peter's second question, why is it that Bigelow sold the ranch, and why did his research stop, or did it?
Yeah, so I feel I'm uncomfortable with telling you what I think the reason was.
Okay, well, we don't want to.
I always worry with without proof. Well, anyways, I think the main point that people think is that he moved on with what he was interested in, which was more about life after death. And I believe that the OSAP program was not funded again after the first 2 years by the DIA and the DOD. So there may have been a loss of interest there in regards to not wanting to spend your own money, or possibly why they wanted the money in the first place. Maybe they had ulterior motives as to what they really wanted to use it for, but were held to very specific points that they could spend the money on. And I don't think that's what they really wanted. They wanted the other points that the DIA didn't want them to look into. They wanted it to be strictly UAP phenomenon. And I also believe that a large part of what was going on was OSAP was used to test how this phenomenon, what it was doing, what it was doing to human beings from a physiological standpoint and psychological. And it's even listed in the reports, the DIA reports, that this was number 9 and number 10, I believe. And now, after that was done, we had these issues with the Havana syndrome attacks and all that, which are very similar to what did occur and continues to occur at Skinwalker Ranch and in the Uinta Basin, and is actually being tracked by additional physicists and scientists in the area. So I think it was twofold that Robert Bigelow really wanted to move on to something that he felt was more important. He could have also possibly felt that the Skinwalker phenomena that follows you home had an issue with his own family.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, the funding of OSAP. I think those were probably the three main reasons or points that are known to the public in regards to why he sold the ranch in 2016 to the new owner.
All right. Now, what phenomena have you yourself observed at Skinwalker Ranch?
Sure. So there is a transient magnetic energy which is incredible. As a matter of fact, the most magnetic phenomena that I've ever come in contact with is 3.5 feet south of the ranch's southern border. And then there's one on the triangle that you saw on the show, and two up on the mesa. And what's crazy is they're in a perfect diagonal line when you put it to GPS coordinates, which was shown on the show as well. And this energy sometimes is so strong that you can suddenly see, your hair rising up on your body. You start getting like this nausea. Your ears start ringing. You get a little bit of blurred vision, and then it's gone. And the readings that I take, which are in microtesla with a vector magnetometer or a cesium magnetometer, go anywhere between a negative 14 all the way up to an 89 microtesla. The lower numbers meaning that there should be some type of cavity or void below ground. The upper numbers, there should be some type of magnetic energy, even like a massive magnet at that level, that magnitude.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just insane because that should never occur. There should be one reading. It'll be off a little or a little difference based on the time of day and the sun, but never ever like that.
Yeah.
So it's
been there, done that. Yeah. So what is Peter's second question there, Ben?
So Peter continues on to ask, in a recent video you released, you show an image of the two most well-known Skinwalker books and say we need to reclassify one as fictional. Which one is fictional in your opinion and why? And what was the motivation if it was fictional?
Yeah, again, this is that question that's going to get me in trouble, so I'll keep it to a minimum. I know several of the individuals from that time period, and the data that was collected, some of it was debunked, but still used as if it was real. And there was money involved, bonuses involved as to what people could find or locate. So you really got to be hesitant as to what's being told. Whenever money is involved, it's an incentive to report to the government and to Robert Bigelow that, hey, we found something or this occurred, when maybe or possibly it didn't, or it didn't to the level that was placed into the journals of those individuals. So again, I just tell people, really, when you're reading or whatever you're reading, take the time out to really think about what's being told and look and ask yourself, was there evidence presented other than somebody's word or whoever wrote the book? Is there something that can really back that? And what's really neat, and don't get me wrong, I absolutely believe there's phenomena occurring on the ranch. I know for a fact that there is this space-time alteration where things from the past catch up to the present and you can interact with it to a certain degree, not fully. But I think that maybe some of that data that was collected was piggybacked off of the very few things that really took place on the ranch. So I write fiction, and I put a lot of reality into those books. I just believe that it's best to start out fictionally, and then people can kind of guess instead of going the other way.
Well, that makes sense. I mean,
that could be a good tool.
Well, I mean, humans learn through narrative, right? You know, we learn through stories. We make sense of the world through stories. And it makes very complicated things a lot easier to grasp if it's in the form of a narrative, right? That's why, you know, it's like, oh, you know, it's why stories are stories, right? It's why news stories are called news stories. It's how we understand things.
Well, some of that's fiction too. 42 years in journalism, I can testify to that.
That is very true. So all this kind of being said, James, what do you think? If you had to kind of take a swing and a guess at it, what could possibly? I guess we kind of touched on this earlier, which is the possible, you know, maybe weaponization of the paranormal, or commercialization of it. In my opinion, being a modern person, who sort of is unsatisfied with how the modern world kind of views reality. It's very disassociated. We'll call it that, right? You look at we all sort of look at things in one way, which is not really accurate, right? So it's like you can look at this board that's in front of me, right? There's a whole bunch of, you know, bells and whistles, bobs, you know, levels, all sorts of stuff like that, and it's like, okay, well, you know, we instinctively think of it in many different ways. So we think of it as a piece of technology, we think of it as a way to manipulate volume so people can hear things, but in a sense, there's sort of this sort of spoken definition of what's being used in it. Now, my sort of odd metaphor is to be basically say there's a multiplicity of reality that's happening, and Skinwalker Ranch happens to be a really great sort of illustration of this, because, you know, you have the scientific phenomena that's going on. You know, you have all of these readings and such. From what it sounds like whoever was involved with this was dissatisfied with what they found. Is that sort of accurate?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good part of it.
Well, what do you think they were looking for, if you had to take a guess?
I believe they were looking for another place, or the ability to go elsewhere. And again, people would consider that an interdimensional or multidimensional portal or gateway. You can see that in the oral tradition, you can hear that in the oral traditions of several of the tribes in the area, see it in the rock art. And I think it was twofold. I think that maybe it's potential of weaponization, but the other is to see how the phenomenon or the phenomena affects humans, and maybe has it already been weaponized? It's possible, and that's what's occurring now around the world with this Havana syndrome. But I think that phenomenon occurring is at a high rate at the ranch, just where Skinwalker Ridge is, and the Triangle and Homestead too. It's almost all the time. So the ability to collect that data on that phenomenon is constant, ongoing. You know it's going to be there. Does that output allow for other phenomena to occur or attract other phenomena? Yes, I believe that's what's happening as well. So you're also having the opportunity to investigate, things that go into ufology, into the paranormal. And then for me, these ancient lost civilizations, they were obviously aware of this and were in the area. So yeah, it's all encompassing.
So with that same vein, the sort of ancient view, right? We'll say the natives, the locals at the time, and maybe still today, the view of it seems to be, as you said, all encompassing. Now, with our fun modern brains that like to break everything apart, do you feel? Well, do you think that the results of this were approached with a modern mind and therefore just didn't comprehend it?
Yes, 100%. They left out the most important aspect in all the research until very recently. As a matter of fact, within the last year and a half, you finally see the missing part, which is the Native American culture, the historic background. You've got to get away from just the last 100 years that Caucasian people moved in and collected data and go to the information that's been there for thousands of years. And you just started seeing this halfway through season 2 last year, and it became a large part of this season, because why reinvent the wheel when all you have to do is locate and understand the data that's available already? And I think what people are missing is that circle stone up on the ridge, which is owned actually by Skinwalker Ranch. It's one of these small little parts of the mesa that's owned by them, is super important, because no matter where you go in the world, you see these circle stones or these cairns, and there's this energy available there. You can monitor it, you can capture the data. Stonehenge is another one, Clava cairns in Scotland, the circle stones in Armenia, here in the Superstition Mountains where I live in the Phoenix area. You capture this, and they're just now realizing that it really is an important aspect that was missing, is the history.
Yeah, it really reminded me of, particularly the spiral carvings reminded me of the work of Paul Dever in the UK and the Dragon Project. And his theories are very, very parallel with those. Superstition Mountains, I was there last October. Well, we're going to have to hook up next time I'm over there, or next time we're over there. I was going to ask you, because you pretty much answered this, are phenomena, or have they been exaggerated at any point or another? And I'll take it that the Skinwalkers at the Pentagon is the book that's more factual.
Yeah,
I don't want to keep dragging you through that.
No, it's more factual because it was paid for with government funding, so it better be. But I labeled it as maybe it needs to be taken in as evidence for looking at it through a Senate subcommittee or something like that.
Okay.
And I'll leave it at that. People can read and they'll see what I'm talking about.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Was a lot of it exaggerated? Oh, absolutely. If anybody were to attempt to tell me I'm crazy or that didn't happen, I have proof. It's available, and I feel okay talking about that.
Yeah, no. We've seen stuff in flap areas that would blow your socks off, and we got it on video, for crying out loud. So we know that many of these things are real. The interpretation is up for grabs, perhaps. But what are the next steps, in your opinion, of what should be done at Skinwalker Ranch as far as research is concerned?
Sure. And one thing that I just want to touch on, too, before I forget, is when you look at a lot of these paranormal locations around the United States, a lot of them have wells in their basement or water underground.
Yep.
And guess what? Skinwalker Ridge has the same thing. It has this funneling of moderately saline water that's it's hard water. And does that play into the energy available? Oh, 100%. I think we need to look and start tracking at Skinwalker Ranch phenomena elsewhere and how it associates with what's going on at the ranch. I think that we need to start connecting the dots in regards to what's powering what underground that leads to what's above the ranch at 5,000 feet, and then where is that energy or data being transmitted to. And the other thing is we need to focus on bringing in the data from the ancient people.
Yep.
And following the maps that are already out there on the rock art, because it's interesting where it leads to. So hint, maybe on or around the area we're talking about. We just have to start tying in the pieces and focusing more on the energies, where the energy is coming from and what it's being allocated to.
So there's a really fascinating common denominator between, I'm going to take a sidestep, not exactly a step back, in sort of different folklores around the world, where not just giants but monsters as well, all forms of them sort of exist on the outskirts of society, right? The extreme example of this with Norse mythology, there's the boundary of the world, and on the other side of it, you have all sorts of monsters that run around in Jotunheim and all those places. But this, it's sort of out of the way. It's far out of the way. It's on the edges of society, essentially, right? So if we sort of view it in this way, humans have always tried to kind of order, chaos, right? You can view it as, civilization being order and everything on the outside of it being chaos. And so we go out and we try to order the chaos. Now, do you believe that these petroglyphs and all sorts of these other images were warnings, or was it a way to sort of order this sort of reality on the outskirts of society?
Yeah, I think it's both. I believe that there are some that are there as a warning, mapping out, where and what and where it was occurring. And then the other ones that are they're capturing that other part of it, the other data. So yeah, it's both.
Okay. Now, Peter, I'm thinking of Peter because Peter's another question. James, tell us about your books and where people can find out more about you.
Sure. So you can look up my books at Amazon.com/author/James Keenan. I write in the paranormal genre, but what I tell people is there's a lot of real information embedded in it. It's a good way to get around the NDAs or to be able to talk about what I couldn't when I was in law enforcement or private investigation, because I didn't want to be, let go the next day when I returned. Now I can be more open because I no longer do that as a living. And I have a trilogy out that is for children that teaches them and introduces them into high strangeness. So the first one deals with UFOs and aliens. The second one deals with shapeshifters, specifically skinwalkers. And then the last one deals with the Bigfoot phenomenon and giants. And then my newest one is called The Giant in the Golden Underworld, that takes place in the Uinta Basin. And I just wanted to create a story with the reality of what's really happening. And for the first time, I actually introduced photography into the book, which in and of itself is a huge clue for people that are interested in what's happening, that I just can't divulge any other way. You just have to take the clues out of the book, what's in the story and what's in the photos, and run with it. Yeah. And you'll be excited when you figure it out.
Well, that's cool. Now, I remember when Ben spent some time with the Navajo people some years ago, and they were amazed that you knew what a skinwalker was.
Well, yeah, I'm not just some regular white kid from Rhode Island. I'm a weird white kid from Rhode Island.
So that was cool.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. They didn't really expect that. I was also one of the only kids in our group because it was a mission trip basically to go out there and try and help people out on the reservation and all that because it's really rough circumstances that they live under, and it's really very very sad. But when we were out there, I made it a point to be as respectful as possible. Anything they were like, don't do this. Like, okay, you got it. Like, I remember very specifically, they were like, if you ever find any pottery in the desert, don't take it. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And we were driving around somewhere, and some kid was like, was like, oh look, there's pottery over there. I was like, don't touch it. Whatever you do, don't touch it.
And respect that Canyon de Chelly as well.
Yes.
So here is one final point from Peter, I think, which is very interesting.
Okie dokie. And Peter writes to us, weapons testing using paranormal stories as a cover is a possible theory. What say you on this, James?
Yeah, it's definitely a possible theory. I agree.
Yeah, I was wondering about that when I was down near Area 51 some years ago, and you'd see the government trucks driving along the road there near Rachel with government plates, white 18-wheelers, the whole bit. And then they got chased across the desert. So I don't know quite what they were doing, but I thought that the UFO thing might be a cover-up, and then I wasn't so sure. So I don't know. So what are the next steps for you in your own work?
So I need to go to Madrid, Spain, to the Museum of the Americas. There's a couple journals that are there. I went to Mexico City thinking that was where they were located and found out, no, I'm in the wrong spot. In regards to what some of those early Spaniards, the conquistadors, and the priests wrote about, people think that the initial intrusion into Utah was in 1776 with the Dominguez Escalante expedition, which is just totally BS. You have journals written in I think the earliest that I have seen was 1541 out of Utah. And guess what it's all about? It's about gold. When they talk about the 7 cities of Cibola, they didn't mean actual cities. They meant that there was enough gold to create 7 cities. And that those mines, they already existed. So who the hell was mining thousands of years ago? Well, when you talk to the people, it's the Starnake. It's these giants that had tools that made sound. So I'm focusing in on, I think, where a lot of people just don't want to go because they don't think it's possible, even though the history is there. They think that those people back in the 1500s and the Native Americans just didn't have the intelligence that we're equipped with starting in the 19th, 20th century. Yeah, it's a big mistake.
Yeah.
So that's my next step, and then I'll be back up for Phenomicon in September in Vernal to present some really, really cool new data, putting it all together. And then I'll be back up in October working in the Uinta Mountains on a couple new sites that we found underground, which are really amazing. And I'm hoping that that'll get us somewhere, I guess I can say, deeper into it all.
Mm-hmm.
Ha, good play on words.
Well, that'll be great. And we're going to share some stuff with you off the air you might find interesting about areas we're working on and some parallels. So, let's take away the announcements there, Ben.
Indeed, and we have quite a few. So the Exeter UFO Festival returns in September at the Exeter, New Hampshire Town Hall, and that's over the Labor Day weekend, September 3rd and 4th. This is a great event, and the whole downtown gets involved. It's sponsored by the Exeter Area Kiwanis Club to benefit local children's charities. Along with ourselves, speakers will include Kathleen Martin, Peter Robbins, Jennifer Stein, Bob Terrio, Mike Stevens, Lynn Nickerson, Valerie LaFasso, Mac Maloney, and many others. The subject of our own talk is time storms, with thanks to the great British researcher Jenny Randalls, who coined the term. We plan to do our traditional live broadcast from the event on Sunday with a panel of the speakers. This is a very fun event, so if you can join us, please do. You can visit ExeterUFOFestival.org for more details.
And Ralph Blumenthal has been added to the speakers list. Excuse me. Tremendous, amazing UFO background. for Ralph. He's teaching it the summer at Phillips Exeter Academy.
Oh, no
right
way.
up the road from the town hall. Yeah.
Very cool.
So, anyway, visit our show website, BehindTheParanormal.com, where you can find over 1,100 hours of our regular shows and our 1,000th official Garden Variety radio show is coming up next year. So we're going to try to do something special for that. Any ideas, let us know. Anyway, those shows come from, and special broadcasts from, since 2008, from CBS Radio, Achieve Radio, and here on WON AM and FM, including those that have been restored in the archives there. Also, hear many of these broadcasts on the major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. You can download our show app. It's free. Doesn't do much, but what do you want for nothing? You'll get the notifications of our shows when they are posted each week, because most people, I guess, like to listen, can't listen live, and we just care that you listen. That's what we like. And you can find out more about the show at the website, etc., many cases, public appearances, and how to book us, etc.
And you can also visit our charity page on our website with links to several good causes we've adopted over the years, including Hope for Hilldale Cemetery in Haverhill, Massachusetts, USA Cares, Canadian Veterans Advocacy, helping Haiti's orphans, the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of America, the Sisterhood of Ground Zero, and most recently, the Western Kentucky Tornado Relief Fund.
So what's coming up next week, then?
Well, next week, that's August 7th, we'll bring you an open line show to answer your questions on all kinds of paranormal subjects. And you can send your questions and comments to Paul at BehindTheParanormal.com.
I don't know if we have time for a long quote.
Well, you can do your best.
All right.
I lied. We don't have time.
We'll save it for next week. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno, and thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the